those who monitor these activities and those who are supposed to go into the banks and say, this is a very clear red flag that you did not red flag. Those systems are being dismantled. So how do we expect this to get any better? It's not going to get any better because the most robust system in the world is or was in the United States, and that's being dismantled on every level.
The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
Welcome to Borderland Narcosis, an Ironclad original, presented by First Form. Don't forget to check out some of the supplements that First Form offers. Go to firstform.com/Borderland. All right, our next guest. I'm excited for this because it was a great conversation with our old friend, Steven Dudley, who is a great journalist for Insight Crime. He talks about some stuff about money laundering that is very new information for me, and I think it's going to be some interesting information for you. Let's go check it out. Well, Steve, welcome back. Welcome back to Borderland. This is now Narcosis. We're focusing a lot more on the cartel, a lot more on the drugs, corruption, laundering, all the things, all the good things.
Sure.
Since we've been back, since we've had you, a lot of things have happened in the United States, Mexico, especially the new administration, and that's caused a lot of different issues. I'd love to start with what might be some of the changes since we last spoke, or even since the administration, that you have seen and noticed in the criminal landscape in South America.
Yeah, well, let's just say it's still early days. There are a lot of things happening. I don't think let's start at the very, very macro level. I don't think the tariffs are nothing. I don't think the trade wars are nothing. I think that in time we will see the ways in which these impact contraband markets. And what happens is you just have people who don't have access to certain goods, so they're going to try and find access to those, or they're going to try and find things that are cheaper, whether these are the raw materials to make whatever they want to make, or whether it's the final product. This is how contraband works. It is the cheaper product. That's why people go for it. So this is something I think we should expect. That's at the super macro level. When you start getting down to these more maybe 10,000 feet levels, so mid level, you do see movement. One of the things that is the really intended consequence of the way that the Trump administration is approaching this issue of tariffs and other economic issues is they're able to squeeze governments that don't normally react to these criminal operations. And the best example is Mexico. We had a situation whereby, in essence, they squeezed the Mexican government into extraditing, I think it was 29 very high level members, some of them the highest levels, that had not been extradited for years. They were just sitting in Mexican prisons, and then boom, flip a switch, and then all of a sudden they're all, these 29 anyway are in the U.S., including the two top ex-leaders of the Zetas. And the Zetas is not a small thing. This is a historical, one of the most violent criminal groups we have ever seen in this region. So they have a lot of crimes to account for. I mean, they killed thousands and thousands of people. This morning I happened to be reading a testimony of a former Zeta that he gave in a U.S. courtroom. And he was talking about Zeta 40, this guy named Miguel Treviño, who was one of the guys who was extradited. And he killed thousands and thousands of people. Well, his organization killed thousands. He alone, though, and this was part of the testimony, was involved in hundreds and hundreds of killing. The person asking the questions was saying, did he kill 300? And the guy's like, oh yeah, more than 300. Did he kill 500? Oh yeah, easily 500. This guy alone killed 500. I mean, he loved being in those. He was a caricature. He was one of those people that you would see in these TV movies or something. You'd say, there's no way that guy exists. Miguel Trevino was that guy. He was a psychopath. So like, these aren't small figures. So you've got that aspect. But then on the flip side of it, you've got a Trump administration that is dismantling these mechanisms by which certain criminal activities, in particular money laundering, and movement of money in cryptocurrency, and those operations are being systematically dismantled. So you've got, on the one hand, them being able to squeeze governments to extraditing, and then on the other hand, they're dismantling the mechanisms and the organizations and the units inside of the United States government that are keeping watch over some of the most important ways in which you can squeeze criminal groups, which is obviously the whole adage of follow the money. So you've got a lot of contradictory things happening at the same time. And we're gonna see how this plays out, but it'll play out in these differing ways. In some ways, there may be positive impacts, and in some ways, there might be really negative impacts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm gonna get to money laundering later, so it's awesome that you just mentioned that, because there's a lot of questions I have about how they even get into the money laundering space and have so much success. But we'll talk about that later. You mentioned the prisoners that they gave up, and for me, I said in my last interview, I almost feel it was just a sign of good faith, since they were already captured and they're in prison. You know, they didn't get anyone who was actively in the space doing it. It was those who were already captured. And so I thought it was almost like, yes, we're helping, yes, we're doing something, but this is the most we're going to do for now, almost like a sign of good faith. Do you feel the same as that, or do you feel like it was a bigger task that they did that?
Well, it wasn't nothing. Yes, maybe in a way these guys were off the radar for a long time, out of the game, so to say, but they weren't necessarily out of the game. There was the notion that the Zetas were still running their criminal operations from jail. So it's not nothing that you take those two guys, in particular, those two leaders, the two Zeta leaders, 40 y 43, out of commission, so to say, when you move them to the U.S. They were also very actively trying to get Zeta 40, Miguel Trevino, out of jail. And they were getting pretty close. They had 6 different witnesses, at least, I'm going to say witnesses, use that word very loosely, because they had essentially coerced these people into saying that the person who was arrested, who the Mexican government claimed was Zeta 40, Miguel Trevino, was not Miguel Trevino. And they had convinced the judge of it already, and they had moved to the higher courts. And this was going to be their argument to get Trevino out of jail. It's not nothing. There was a possibility he was going to get out. So I would say, and then the third thing about that is just that they had been not extraditing him, even though the U.S. had been requesting this for years. So there's something there. But yeah, there's another element of this where it's just window dressing. It's just for show. The Canadians did this as well. Like, the Canadians had already done all of the things that the Trump administration put on their fentanyl wish list. There is a big cartel presence in Mexico, but it doesn't mean there's nothing. Of course, they're going to have representatives there if they're moving any significant quantities of drugs through there. They have longstanding contacts with motorcycle gangs there. And those contacts have also, the Canadian contacts have been found in Mexico. So there's a long-standing relationship between outlaw motorcycle gangs in Canada and Mexican criminal groups. Why would we think there would be anything different as it relates to synthetic drugs? It makes sense that there would be. So I think that there are some things happening. There have been reports about, I would say, somewhat sophisticated fentanyl labs in Canada. And the fact of the matter is that there's a very low barrier of entry to manufacturing fentanyl. That's also part of this issue that we're going to face going forward with many synthetic drugs, is that the barrier of entry is not that high. And with artificial intelligence coming into play, it's going to be the barrier is going to be even lower for people to enter into this market, which can perversely also have a positive effect, because if you have more players, you might dilute the power of these large criminal groups because you'll have so many smaller players. So ironically, you might get a steadiness of the supply, or maybe even an increase of the supply, or perhaps a diversification of the supply. And all of those things may dilute the power of large criminal groups like the Sinaloa Cartel or the Jalisco Cartel, because they just can't control all these independent players.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. Well, in recent news last week, a leader of the Sinaloa Cartel arrested in Salem as part of a large fentanyl bust. DEA is calling it the largest fentanyl seizure in U.S. history. Do you hear about that?
In Oregon, then.
Yeah, in Oregon.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that the reality of these markets is that we can talk all day and night about all the different mechanisms that we're going to use to shore up the border, to stop the flow of immigration, to stop the flow of, perhaps immigration is a slightly different topic, but immigration versus fentanyl. I mean, fentanyl is just comes across in such small quantities, and you need so little of it that it's not even right to say it's an uphill battle. It's impossible. You're not going to be able to stop this. There's a reason that these things are now, $1 a pill in some places. There's a reason that people are now readily smoking 5 pills at a shot. That's because it's so cheap. And the reason it's cheap is because there's an abundance of supply. You don't need that much to satisfy the market. And that's true with so many synthetic drugs. So when we sit down and try and figure out how to deal with synthetic drugs, and we focus all of our efforts and emphasis and resources on supply side solutions, we are missing a giant part of this equation.
What's that?
Then we have to deal with the fact that we are not going to stop this. That this is way more difficult than marijuana, way more difficult than cocaine, way more difficult than heroin. Any of these legacy organic drugs are so much easier to deal with from a supply side approach. And when I say supply side approach, I mean the act of trying to intercept or repress supply in some way so that people don't consume it.
Got it. It's easier to produce.
Well, it's easy to produce and it's easy to move. We're talking about just teeny quantities. These are nothing quantities. And I think we spoke about this the last time that I was on. These in the larger scheme of things of the chemical industry, this is nothing. You can't even see it. Again, if we did the pie chart, in this case, you did the pie chart, you wouldn't even see the chemicals on the pie chart that make up how much you need in order to supply all of the US market with the fentanyl that it consumes right now. You would not even see that on the pie chart if you looked at all the chemicals that are being produced worldwide. And that's what you're facing down. You're not facing down how much coca are we producing or how much marijuana are we producing. No. We're talking about the global chemical industry. And so that's the supply chain. It's not poor farmers in some mountainous area. It's the global chemical supply chain. So we really have to wrap our heads around that. Those are your peasant farmers, is the global chemical industry. So I want you to replace the image of the farmer in the mountains cultivating the coca leaf or the poppy plant or the marijuana plant, and replace that with a giant chemical industry. Just in China alone, $15 billion chemical industry, of which a teeny percentage may be in the range of $20 to $40 million of which could be connected to fentanyl. Okay, put that in the $15 billion pie chart, and you got nothing. That's why you don't see any of this. That's why it's so hard to repress it. That's why the price just in the last 5 years has gone down 20-fold or more. You're just fighting a losing battle.
So things like the tariffs you were talking about earlier, things like what the administration has put in play, you don't feel will make an impact on slowing it down?
No, I don't. It just won't. It's just not. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to be able to do it. It's just physically, like just talking about the physical product of this. This is, I mean, I don't know how, it's very hard for me to kind of put it in sort of images for your listeners, but think about just like a globe that's full of chemicals, and right, the chemicals are the raw materials to make these drugs, to make the fentanyls, to make the methamphetamines. That's the raw materials, right? And it's just this huge amount of chemicals. All of these chemicals are moving around the world to do all kinds of products for us. The shampoos, the soaps, any synthetic oils, all of this sort of any sort of product, the lots of plastics, so many products, right? Is the global chemical industry involved with, that you're not going to stop that. You don't want to stop the flow of those global goods. And in order to control fentanyl, or control the production of the illegal production of methamphetamine or fentanyl, you need to slow that down. But nobody wants to slow that down. So this isn't something that you can actually grind to a halt. And there isn't something. It's finding a needle in a haystack inside of a haystack. I mean, it's just it's just so hard to find it, that you're just spinning your wheels on this. There are ways, of course, to mitigate this. You could certainly think about even technology in a new way, and maybe that's where we should be going. We should be thinking about these sort of decentralized ledgers. And by decentralized ledgers, I'm talking about things like blockchain. Things that are not controlled by anybody in particular, that people have to register movement of goods across these borders. So if I am working in the blockchain, it's going to indicate what went through my warehouse, when it went through, et cetera, and I have no control over that. That's out of my control. And that would be a way of creating a system of accountability that couldn't be corrupted or has less chance of being corrupted. Those sorts of things maybe we can start to implement in order to control these supply chains. But this is the not just the future. This is obviously the present of drugs. mean, you have a parallel legacy drug market, which continues to operate largely the same. So we're talking about cocaine and heroin and marijuana to a certain extent. And then you have this other drug supply chain, which is the synthetic drug supply chain, which is running in parallel and is gaining strength, and will continue to gain strength. And so we're talking about how do you deal with this synthetic drug supply chain?
What's going on, y'all? I'm not sure if you know this, but Borderland Narcosis is sponsored by First Form. First Form is a wellness supplement company. And, I've been with them for about 7 years. And I've been with them for that long because I truly believe in not just the product, but the people who own the company. They are a culture that just believes in your health. And so if you guys haven't tried it before, I would recommend you go and check out the Formula One Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Add a little bit of a ignition to that, and you'll have exactly what you need for your post-workout drink. This is something I've used for a very long time. When I'm in the best shape of my life, it's always been because I have a nice regimen of the First Form products. So if you guys are interested, go check them out at firstform.com/Borderland. Okay, use our link. It is the #1 stphorm.com/Borderland. And if you order over $75, you get free shipping. And if you're new to the site, you get a free app for 30 days. So go check it out. Again, thank you so much for all the support. See you soon. Yeah, and you mentioned something about AI, which I was like, man, I never thought of AI being involved in the drug trade with cryptocurrencies. How does that, explain that to me? It's the first time I've ever heard that, but how does AI get involved in this whole thing?
A lot of different ways. How do you use AI? Let's just start there. What do you do?
It automates a lot of my scheduling, business stuff. Helps organize a lot of my life right now. It's what I use AI for.
It can definitely be an organizer, and it certainly could give you a sense of what was out there legally. You might be facing legal challenges, or you might want to know, for example, what are the regulatory regimes around certain types of chemicals. So it could certainly help you in that regard. Maybe you could spin it so that it actually gives you a plan, given the different regulatory regimes around chemicals, for example. Maybe you could spin, and I don't want to give anybody any ideas, but you could spin it in a way that says, all right, in order to avoid being on the wrong side of the law, you should move this chemical through this country, then you get it to that country.
Interesting.
You could see it that way. You could see it helping you out and doing, it's certainly already helping out physicians, right? As they're dealing with diseases. Why can't you apply it towards formulas that get you new synthetic drugs that are derivatives of the drugs that we're currently seeing on the market? The meths, the fentanyls, the others, you certainly could use it in that regard.
Yeah.
You could certainly use it in trying to understand what are the defenses that exist that you're confronting in terms of how many law enforcement are available, what units actually are investigating you or could investigate you in certain spaces, and maybe you want to avoid those spaces. And we haven't even gotten to the sort of elements that can enter into AI warfare, drones and others. So just leaving all those aside. So you can see all these multiple ways in which, if you're a criminal that is creative in any way, shape, or form, of course you are having your people stick their noses into AI.
Have you been able to confirm any of that? Seeing any cartels that are starting to use AI?
Well, we know they're using drones in Michoacan, for example, and presumably those are in some way, shape, or form connected to AI. Increasingly, those are AI run machines. There's certainly lots of activity around cybercrime these days.
Yeah.
We are increasingly tracking big cybercrime groups. Most of them run out of Brazil. Brazil is sort of the epicenter of cybercrime in the region. And yeah, those are just a couple of examples, but nothing that jumps out more than, because you don't necessarily see in criminal indictments the prosecutors talking through the use of AI, at least not yet. But there may be, you can take guesses at sort of where they might go. And I think we just need to look at the way in which we approach AI is going to be very similar. It's like anything else. It's like the global financial system or the global trade system. The criminals, in essence, follow those leads. They become part of the global economy. They become part of the global financial system. They're following the major trends. It's very much a hide in plain sight approach, and I would presume the same is going to happen with AI.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's the chase to be on top from the CJ&G and the Sinaloa Cartel. The CJ&G seems to be the cartel that's more, I would say, current, or it seems like a younger demographic. So then that would lean me to say that they're probably the ones who would be toying with AI or different technologies more often than the Sinaloa Cartel. Is that something you would probably agree with?
I think that both are split up into various factions, and there are probably some factions that are a little bit more sophisticated than others. Maybe some are trending younger, and that would help them to be more in tune with things like AI or use of social media or these communications platforms, and understanding which communications platforms to use, or how to maybe use AI to create their own language, so that they can communicate. There's a lot of things they can do with this, but I don't have any sense necessarily that one is younger than the other. I do get a sense that there's kind of a generational war going on right now in Sinaloa, with the kind of chapitos, let's call it, trending younger versus the mayos, and let's call that trending older. So in that regard, I see even within the Sinaloa cartel a generational divide. But I don't know. I couldn't tell you with any certainty about the sort of median age of people in the Jalisco cartel. What is clear about the Jalisco cartel is that they are very interested in building an army. And that is different from what you get when you think about the Sinaloa cartel. They're much more interested in having bespoke units that are connected to specific factions that are very loyal, whereas the Jalisco cartel is reaching out and recruiting forcibly, from what we can see, very often forcibly, huge numbers of people, just saying to other criminal groups, te alineas o te mueres, like you're in or you're dead. So that's the Jalisco cartel model, which is much more built around control of physical space, building out an army, pushing out and in sort of a geographic way, whereas the Sinaloa cartel is much more about strategic placing, control of specific officials, that much more sort of surgical approach.
It's a lot of things are coming to light here, and in 2024, TD Bank was hit with a record $3 billion fine over drug cartel money laundering. We also had another gentleman on here that was part of an investigation on money laundering, and a bank was involved. How are they starting to get more diversified in the money laundering space?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We always, I guess we don't always start with the bank, but the bank cases are the ones that catch our attention because they do remain very, very large cases, and they are still the predominant way in which these in which money is moved. I think we are very focused now on crypto. I think rightfully so. I think this is where we're going, but I still think it's a rather small percentage of the money laundering that's happening. When I say small percentage, I'm guessing, but like a quarter or less of the money laundering could be happening in the crypto realm. The crypto realm isn't big enough yet really to handle all of this stuff, and it's still an outlier. Of course, it's very important, and of course we have to keep an eye on it. But it's interesting that, and I think good that you start with a case that has to do with a traditional bank, a bank that we recognize, a bank that we've seen on television and commercials, because this is where it's happening, and not enough of those cases are made. We have done many money laundering investigations from a journalistic standpoint. And what always stands out to me is how few of these cases there are. There is this adage of follow the money, but there are very few units to follow the money in these countries, including in the United States, even though we have giant infrastructure that is following the money. But they don't make many of these cases. Most of these situations where they want to control the money get channeled through other means. The mechanisms to crack down on the criminal groups happen through things like visas. You cancel people's visas if you suspect that they're involved in these illicit activities, or more importantly, through the Treasury Department, through OFAC list is the most important of these things, where you essentially freeze all of the assets and movement of assets of any company that you think is connected to a criminal group. That's where most of these investigations end up, because they have a very hard time proving these money laundering schemes, because now they're so multi-layered, and they're often happening in so many different spaces, and increasingly they're not happening in the same space. So you're not even having money move between these groups. You're having them purchase and have sort of equivalent purchases happening in two different countries at the same time. So they don't even have to exchange money. So then there's no transaction. So how do you prove that case in a court of law? You can't. And if they're happening in places like China, really? Like, what are you going to do there? How are you going to investigate money laundering that is connected to Chinese assets or banks? Good luck with that. So you can see why it has trended in this direction of you just don't have a lot of these cases. But at the same time, it is also kind of frustrating. So yes, you have this diversification, to go back to your original question, and we're going from kind of, money exchange houses, are obviously banks. Those were kind of traditional ways to these sort of cross-border exchanges of capital, to all the way to crypto. And this is the kind of range you're seeing now. And so if you're a money laundering investigator, you are facing down myriad challenges because you've got to decipher all of these different things that may be happening, and maybe all happening at the same time.
Yeah, it's pretty insane to see how these banks, I don't know, there's millions of dollars coming in and out, that there should be, I imagine there's some kind of red tape that says, hey, if this certain amount comes in or out, we need to investigate it further. But, in this case, this TD Bank, over $670 million were laundered before anything was kind of like identified or anyone kind of raised suspicion. I don't understand. It feels when in the banking, and this is just there's another one that's very similar numbers. And again, no red flags. No one investigated it until finally there was a death, and then so on and so forth. But like, how does that happen in a banking system? Like, why don't the banks have something in play that might be able to kind of further investigate when you have that kind of money coming in and out of a bank?
Malfeasance, corruption, criminal activity within the bank. None of these red flag systems that you're talking about. And you talk about AI. I mean, easily you could institute some kind of AI system that is raising red flags. It doesn't mean that you necessarily stop the transactions. You could let the transactions even go through. And then when it reaches a certain threshold, then you're like, oh, well, this warrants a very deep look at this. Incentives for them to comply with this. Obviously, the disincentive is that they're going to be put out to the world like a money laundering bank. They may lose some business from it. They may gain business from it. Let's be honest. So there's that. And what's the cost? I mean, the cost is what, a few $1 billion, which for a bank like this, I'm guessing isn't going to hit them too hard. I don't know. I don't know what TD Bank's annual gross revenue is, but I can imagine it's pretty damn high. Yeah. So there are a lot of different things that can be done, and what we're seeing now, unfortunately, with the Trump administration is a push towards deregulation, not regulation, and the mechanisms by which those who monitor these activities and those who are supposed to go into the banks and say, this is a very clear red flag that you did not red flag, those systems are being dismantled. So how do we expect this to get any better? It's not going to get any better, because the most robust system in the world is or was in the United States, and that's being dismantled and on every level.
Why is that being dismantled? I haven't heard that yet.
I don't know, but it's under the guise of efficiency and all the rest, and they're taking apart these systems, whether it's the regulatory system, even things like the SEC, which you don't necessarily think of in money laundering terms, but they had an investigation into a platform that is a crypto platform called Tron. And the head of that crypto platform, as it happens, was under investigation. And Tron is very important because most of its servers operate in China. So it becomes a very attractive platform for people to elude the U.S. eyeballs for movements of crypto. And this person was under investigation by the SEC. This person announced publicly, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but he announced publicly that he had purchased a number of shares in the Trump family venture into crypto, this crypto company that they've created. They're trying to put out this crypto company, which is actually becoming quite successful for obvious reasons. And then all of a sudden the SEC says that they're going to put the investigation into him on ice. That's not good. You've got entities within the United States government that are telling me that we need to keep an eye on things like Tron. And then you have a U.S. government that is investigating Tron, or at least a regulatory agency, in this case the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, that says we're going to put this on ice not long after this person purchases a number of shares inside the Trump family operation of crypto. I don't know if there's a one-to-one correlation, but it certainly doesn't smell good. And you say to me, why is this happening? And I say, I don't know. I say that in general terms, the Trump administration is not pro-regulatory, is certainly one of these administrations that has vilified the government in many respects. It is part of the brand of the Trump administration to vilify the government, talk about things like the deep state, etc. But there are portions of the quote unquote deep state that do these investigations. This is part of what they do. So you dismantle them, then you are debilitating the ability to go after these criminal organizations.
That's interesting. You know, it seems like the Trump administration is the most aggressive administration going after cartel. Now, if you're talking money laundering side, it sounds like it's not as much from what you're saying. Is that what you're pretty much saying?
It's going in the opposite direction.
Right.
It's going in the opposite direction. It's not just not as robust or as vibrant. It's going the other way.
Man, that's pretty fascinating. It's almost as if on one side, you know, if you flip the administration back to the Biden administration, it was almost open on one end and more closed off based on the laws, right? Based on the FCC. FCC is what it was, or the
SEC, the Securities and Exchange
SEC.
Commission.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as we're talking, I can look up this guy's name. And this case, and it's not like I am just spouting this off from nothing. There are numerous news reports that are talking about this particular case.
It's definitely a familiar case. I know I've heard some about it. The crypto space is something I just don't. I'm not very familiar with. I know it's a space where people can do a lot of money exchanges. I know there's a lot of the I would say the black market space uses a lot of crypto. A lot of people are in the crypto space and a lot of different things happening. It's still very, very young. There's still very little regulation on it. If there ever is going to be regulation, I think that's the point of it, to not have that. So very interesting topic. And when you have the federal government involved in the crypto space, that starts to raise a couple red flags for me as well. It's something I definitely need to educate myself on a lot more.
Yeah. And this is just I'm just looking at a Reuters report about this. It says the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission is exploring a resolution to its closely followed civil fraud case against Justin Sun, the Chinese cryptocurrency entrepreneur and advisor to crypto project backed by U.S. President Donald Trump. That's the lead of the story. So again, I'm not making this up out of whole cloth. This is being reported. This is a real thing. And this is troubling. This is one troubling sign of many troubling signs. We have written about this in Insight Crime, by the way. We've written about the systematic dismantling of these different mechanisms to investigate money laundering specifically.
Yeah, that is. I mean, it's the first time on this show we've heard it. It's something that's very new to me. I'm kind of at a loss for words. I didn't think, because there's so many sides of this. How do you disrupt the cartel? How do you disrupt the drugs? How do you dismantle it? And then the financial side is a big one, right? The banks that are involved, the money laundering that's involved. There's so much money in this that you have to understand. Like you said, follow the money. And when you start getting to the crypto side, I did not know that the U.S. government, I haven't been educated on anything that's going on that side of it. So let
me just and I'll just read a little bit from the reporting that we did on this. The Trump administration has said it will largely stop enforcing two key laws in the United States: the Corporate Transparency Act, which aimed to curb money laundering through shell companies, and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which bans bribery in international business deals. Trump's team has also moved to disband several specialized law enforcement units in the U.S. Justice Department that focused on fighting corruption abroad. The administration is also reportedly considering severe cuts to the unit that tackles corruption inside the United States. So this is happening. This isn't a fiction. This isn't an attack on the deep state. This is a dismantling of laws and units and regulatory agencies that deal with this issue of money laundering or corruption, which are often, very often, overlapping.
Yeah, I'd love to have someone on here to try and give us more insight in exactly that from the government and see if they'd be interested in joining us on here to explain all those decisions.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful for your listeners, for sure. And yeah, you have these contradictory things happening. They are squeezing allies and enemies alike, to be honest, into doing things that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. And again, the best example is the Mexican government's decision to extradite 29 of these high-level traffickers literally overnight.
Yeah.
And then you have other sides. You have the other side of the coin, which is they're dismantling the infrastructure and mechanisms by which we can keep an eye on things like money laundering and corruption. That's not good. So I don't know how to reconcile those. It's not my job to reconcile those. It's just my job to try and figure out what's happening, and explain in the best way that I can, and over time what and why it's happening.
Well, I really appreciate you bringing that to light here. It's something that we're definitely going to further investigate. There's so many sides of this cartel drug space that we try to give a voice to, and this is a new one on me, which me and my producers are going to get busy and try and find more answers to that ourselves so we can bring it to the show. So I genuinely appreciate your time and your expertise. This subject is always fascinating, and there's, like I said, there's so many levels to it. But if there's anything else you'd like to give to the audience, please, right now is your time.
Vince, I look forward to the periodic updates we can do on how this evolves.
Yes, I agree. I'm going to start looking right away. I think this is fascinating. And yeah, follow the money. That's always an interesting one. So I think this is going to be a good one that we can continue to dissect. And if you get any more information, please let me know. If there's any other experts out there you want me to get a hold of, I'll bring them on here and put them in the hot seat and let them answer questions.
Okay. Sounds good.
Awesome, brother. Thank you so much for joining us today, Steven.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Borderland, Narcosis, an Ironclad original presented by First Form. Go get your supplements. It's time. I got to do it too. Listen, I got to do it too. Firstform.com/Borderland. You guys go get what you need. Thank you so much for this interview. You guys, I hope you enjoyed it. It's always nice to give people platforms to give their expertise. Today is no different. So there's tons of great interviews coming in the near future. I'm excited for a few that you guys get to see. We'll get to them later. Thank you for everything. Love you. God bless.